When searching up Naruto rankings, many stumble upon the most notorious criminal organization, the Akatsuki, or the mighty leaders of Konoha, the Hokage, but nonetheless, the group you don't hear enough about is the strongest clan in Konoha, who owes its peace to their effort. So how would you actually rank them? Going over the ultimate ranking of me teaching you how to argue each position and ranking, and why some people would argue for a different placement. How might one character be greater in raw power, but lose to the person below him? Well, let's find out. Also, as an initial preface, I'm going to use this list of characters here, which includes multiple forms of certain characters. Take Sasuke for example. I have Kage Summit Sasuke and Adult Sasuke because they're vastly different, and it makes the list a bit more interesting, along with 4 separate tiers for a broader perspective on how they rank. So, let's rank the Uchiha, shooting for 20k. Let's go. After having fought with and against the strongest shinobi to ever live, Sasuke, the last legitimate heir to the Uchiha clan, Hale's Databook 1, would go on to atone for his sins in the shadows of Konoha. We know that while he did lose an arm, this wasn't a permanent loss for Sasuke in terms of power. Where in the Sasuke Shinden novel, the narrator posits that if another Kaguya level threat were to appear and the future they've worked so hard for would be disturbed, well, no. Sasuke shook his head no. He wouldn't let it happen. He would protect it himself. Kakashi's acclaimed strongest student wouldn't let another Kaguya threat disturb their peace, and continued on the hunt for a group of hypothetical possible beings who scare Kaguya so much she would need to mount an army of nearly 1,000 strong just to protect herself, even if you say all the Zetsu fused. And upon visiting Kaguya's ice world and treading through her abandoned castle once used to praise her, out of nowhere came Kinshiki, the splitter of worlds. The hypothetical beings that they were so desperately searching for are real and very much a threat. Yet Sasuke would completely parry off Kinshiki in just basic taijutsu and kenjutsu, using his ocular technique to later display Kinshiki's carelessness. What most people don't note here, however, is that Sasuke uses 2 forms of fighting throughout the series. The former of which is displayed against Itachi, Madara, Kaguya, and Naruto for example, where he'll use over 9 Chidori in multiple fire styles, summonings, genjutsu, and most notably is Susanoo, stuff like that, as shown in those latter examples. However, the latter style is actually shown against Killer Bee, where Sasuke, having not fully recovered from his fight with Itachi and his recent loss of the curse mark, needs to fight with chakra conservation in his mind and uses kenjutsu and an ocular technique. So Sasuke here, even when fighting the Splitter of Worlds himself, is holding back substantially concerning his style. For example, even the chapter synopsis statement remarks that Naruto is going all out only in the avatar, and since Sasuke isn't using his correlating avatar, he also wouldn't be going all out against Kinshiki. Although even once Momoshiki, the likely stronger of the two, absorbs all of Kinshiki, he begins to completely blitz around the previously relative opponents, displaying an entire new plane of power, never once seen in the history of shinobi kind. Destroying all the Kage with simply taijutsu, although using his faster hair ninjutsu to completely restrain Gaara, yet here's Sasuke completely slicing up Momoshiki's faster chakra snakes. Plus, when you account for Sasuke being a stated equal to Naruto, he should also be able to, engage in a arguably superior taijutsu bout with Momoshiki, just going off Naruto's looming fatigue. Now you may be thinking to yourself, Virhtue, Indra is an Akatsuki, and you're right, although in being the founder of all the Uchiha and being formed from Hagoromo's power, despite filler misconceptions as a practical Uchiha and all but last name, he needs to be included, and his power is actually quite fascinating, something Databook 4 agrees with in calling him a god of war and combat, a genius who is the son of the great Hagoromo, inheriting his power from birth as the rightful heir. He possesses the strength to overcome any obstacle alone. Implied that where both Madara and Sasuke fail insofar as taking up their lonesome paths, Indra can truly do that with power that rivals Hagoromo's, at least once it's developed. And in this being the rightful heir talent in comparison to Ashura, Indra would grow to tread a path of his own, similarly to how both Sasuke and Madara would later come to do. However, in Indra's case, he can actually stand on his own. as the aforementioned statement implies, that he has virtually unparalleled levels of ability for his age, power that exceeds all others around him, including Ashura, who would find his power not in innate talent, but rather in the bonds of connection he made with people. You see, throughout the manga, there's actually no evidence that Hagoromo ever had Indra and Ashura through mating with a woman, but rather simply had them or created them. That's to why he, being one genetic link away, has full Akatsuki traits, but his sons are totally human and have totally different conceptions of life, creating the ultimate balance and order for mankind, something Hagoromo also holds to the pinnacle of all things, and thus in him, inheriting all the conceivable talent from Hagoromo, it's actually pretty grounded. Ashura's a boy who, like Naruto, wasn't destined for infinite power simply by means of his father, just like Naruto, but similarly, through the aid of not only his training, but the bonds he made with others, would finally reach Indra's level, who was naturally born with all of Hagoromo's power, according to Data Book 4 in multiple locations. And while many will pivot this idea over to dojutsu, Hagoromo himself states that it's his powerful chakra which he inherited, and while this could have been, either before or after losing the Ten Tails, it really doesn't matter all that much, seeing as Hagoromo was a Ten Tails Jinchuriki for so long that their DNA bonded together, insofar as while yes, Hagoromo gained the Ten Tails power, if you were to gain the Ten Tails power, you'd also gain Hagoromo's power as well. We see that every following Ten Tails Jinchuriki and even Nine Tails Jinchuriki have his markings all over him, which alludes to why characters directly related to Hagoromo, like the Gold and Silver brothers, could eat the chakra of a deadly poisonous monster and already have a built-in immunity, because they have the Ten Tails, and this is, the Nine Tails DNA that's already inside them, even if it's small. And this is a concept I've gone over heavily before, but the footnote here would just be that Indra inheriting all of Hagoromo's power through talent isn't to be downplayed by means of arguing the linguistics of whether it's a pre or post Ten Tails separation, and this also translates over to Ashura, so note that too. After realizing the new possibilities for the future of mankind in Ashura, Hagoromo split the Bijou and gave all of his power to Ashura, who, while yes, did rely on comrades, this isn't really what you think. Like, he wasn't jumping Indra, right? It's similar to Naruto, who relied on Jiraiya for having a Rasengan, and Pa for Sage Mode, and B for QB Mastery and whatnot, but he still has all of those powers within himself, where he even gains access to his very own pseudo 6-pass Sage Mode, resembling but not identical to Naruto's 6-pass Sage Mode avatar he used to defeat Sasuke in the Final Valley. However, the difference here is particularly being in how both Indra and Ashura are proportional to the typical perfect Susanoo size. The avatar is still only the size of the Susanoo's head, meaning it's actually much smaller. Ashura also resides in the avatar's belly when Naruto sits in its head, and while Data Book 4 not listing Ashura as a user should be enough for him not having Naruto's avatar, but rather a unique one of his own, he also just has different markings on the avatar plus a bead necklace. Although what's actually really interesting is technically while he doesn't actually have or resemble the typical avatar, he heavily resembles the 6-pass Senjutsu 3 Kurama fused form in the Final Valley, with their markers being the exact same, except for the necklace and whatnot. The cloaked tails merging into like a cape and stuff, which points me to the idea of being open to Ashura having some sort of genuine 6-pass avatar, even if it's not one-for-one Naruto's or whatnot, and is either different or just like, baby Kurama, although I'm really not convinced of that idea. However, and more importantly, it does still possess things like truth-seeking orbs that should be capable of nulling all ninjutsu, showing how divine Ashura has truly become just to battle Indra. However, let's notice this very intricate detail. Hagoromo states that through the power of cooperation, he had obtained power rivaling that of his brothers, who was once again that Hagoromo level threat, meaning both are now Hagoromo level, and then Ashura gets all of Hagoromo's power stacked on top of that, which manifests in a 6-pass level avatar, truth-seeking orbs, and possibly more. So then, if Ashura is this double Hagoromo threat, then how did Indra ever match his power? Well, the 4th data book notes that there were embers smoldering within Indra over the fact that his dear father chose his talentless and seemingly pathetic younger brother over his own genius, over the rightful heir. Black Zetsu would then whisper to the heartbroken Indra, stoking those embers into a hellfire, and from that point on, an inconsolable rage and hatred burned within Indra's troubled spirit, causing him to reincarnate for generations to come. Something that Sasuke with his Rinnegan in the Final Valley would also be confident in doing, opening a side point for Indra's higher ends and whatnot, which may actually just allude to how strong Indra and his rage truly was, meaning that through the MS, which is stated to have given Sasuke multiple amps, of the which made him unrecognizably more powerful, and upon furthering such via instilling a burning hatred for his father and younger brother, Zetsu's whispers continued to empower Indra so that both he and his younger brother would continue fighting like this for the rest of their life and the next. So, in truth, you're looking at two characters likely massively more powerful than Hagoromo ever was in his prime state, possibly twice as powerful, which was actually at the bare minimum able to fight on a low end to Kaguya herself, and I've also heard many posit that Hagoromo should be weaker in his post-death state, seeing as he's just a mortal whose chakra has been summoned in the mind of Naruto and Sasuke, similarly to how Minato did it, you know what I mean? And if you argue that, then he should significantly be above Ten Tails Madara by virtue of that, but seriously, Indra is a monster, so let's put some more respect on his name. Furthermore though, I'd like to close tier 1 and saying that unlike the following tiers, this one's actually pretty straightforward insofar as how, Sasuke is much greater in terms of raw power, and he also has like every conceivable way of beating Indra. Sasuke by this point is arguably the greatest Mangekyo user to ever live and has had 6 Paz ocular amps in the Rinnegan to complement his Enton Kagetsuchi, which is hailed as the greatest offensive ocular ability and how it uses the Amaterasu, the hailed strongest physical attack, where we then see that the Rinnegan in specific is monstrous for Sasuke. So let's look at the Madara fight, right? Where you'll notice that Sasuke may be slightly inferior to Naruto, if not nigh equal, but he's still able to stab Madara in the chest and cut him in half without taking any damage whatsoever, despite Naruto being knocked around just to pressure Madara, and this was simply be attributed to his usage of the Ema no Teijikara, which Indra has no answers for, seeing as we have absolutely no idea what's in his arsenal to begin with. He could have fire style, right? He has a Susanoo, but, anything really beyond that is pretty speculative. So Sasuke would monstrously beat Indra and could arguably be in a tier of his own, but that feels a bit awkward. Following up with the Uchiha Ghost Madara, it's crucial to note what form of Madara I'm going to be using, and I'm taking a Rinnegan Sage Madara, as I think it's certainly the strongest form of Madara without the Ten Tails, and I think Indra should beat up the Ten Tails Madara, although they should admittedly be in the same tier. So if you're curious where Ten Tails Madara would be, then he should be kind of in tier 1, but would certainly be the weakest. This form of Madara, however, is unequivocally unique insofar as how strong and unique his arsenal actually is, even in comparison to someone like Jubito. And this is actually a pretty interesting discussion, but I don't want to just pivot all my points to the video I did on this, so let's actually run through a majority of them here, as I think you'll enjoy the nuanced approach going over both Madara and Jubito at the same time, because it's actually kind of hard to separate who's raw power and who would win in a fight and whatnot. So yeah, let's go ahead and get the complete picture of their power. And yeah, upon finally plunging into the monstrosity that was the Ten Tails, Jubito would no longer be the man whose name he couldn't even recognize that could fight KCM2 Naruto, but the one who could completely transcend even the Hokage, blitzing through both Hashirama and Tobirama, with the latter and Hiruzen agreeing that Hashirama's sentiments of Jubito being the strongest, or, stronger than him. Even Madara at this point monologues how he would love to watch the Hokage beg for mercy, but his looming plan to overhaul his once student, now weapon, and the strongest enemy needs to become a god of men of sorts. You see, Madara seems confident in that while yes, Obito could stomp all the Hokage simultaneously, which he was virtually doing with Hashirama's clone, then Tobirama, then Hiruzen, he still believes that he himself could take down that very monster. And this may not be too far-fetched, if you account for primarily the second Hokage, one of the fastest shinobi ever, Tobirama, and how he was capable of placing the seal on Jubito's armpit the last time they were in contact through sheer speed, but more importantly, he was actually able to continuously utilize such a mark to outplay Jubito with the technique that is said to, quote, transcend the concepts of space and distance, according to Databook 3, teleporting behind him and swapping out his positions into combo attacks, teleporting Rasengans on his back, you name it. Although against Madara, in all fairness, he was able to react to the flying Rising Slice and even dodge it, before completely beating up Lord Second, displaying how Madara's sureness of victory won't be forsaken even if it's confronted by the fastest shinobi of his generation. Now, to truly understand Madara's power, you need to understand a bit of the narrative for who Madara has become, what Madara has become, where Madara believes that the heavens are smiling upon him and he's going to save the world. You see, as far back as when the 5 Kage, held as the strongest shinobi on the planet in basically every single medium, like Gaara Hiden, Ross's databook file, the chapter 357 synopsis statement, the 4 databook file for Oniki, the fan books, you say it right, anything, faced off against a literal living legend, a man whose power was mythical, whose name was enough to wage war on the entire world. Madara would completely humiliate the strongest characters we knew of, rewriting the possibilities of how strong basic fire style could be, asking them how hard would they like to be beaten by the Susanoo, and even making a mockery of Tsunade's lifelong ability, where Madara introduces us to his once rival, as does Kabuto, that being Hashirama, a man who could heal wounds without weaving a single sign, whose regeneration eclipsed that of Tsunade's limb and organ regenerating ability, with abilities that were seen as fairy tale, sitting alongside the founder of Shinobi himself. Hashirama was presented as a god to the strongest people we knew of who were being dominated by his rival. So consequently, jot that down, for the narrative power shifts of the story. Both Naruto and Sasuke, who are stated to be equals by the end of it, have been purposed in the Kage Summit to stand at or above the 5 Kage, the strongest Jinchuriki and the strongest remaining Akatsuki member. However, Madara is introduced as someone leagues above all the Kage at the same time, but is inferior to the ambiguous power of Hashirama, the god of shinobi. As conflict persists and the tides of war begin to shift, and the Hokage, the strongest of every Gokage generation, could no longer hold a candle to Jubito, Naruto and Sasuke would synchronize their power in what could only be described as the two coming close to Madara and Hashirama, which then replaces those two back on the map for the pinnacle of power, which previously was Jubito, with Tobirama stating that Sasuke is an Uchiha who demonstrates the same potential as Madara, with Orochimaru stating that his gut tells him, based on everything he's learned in his entire life, that Sasuke will one day be a shinobi to surpass Madara, which narratively opens the doors that Sasuke, despite being able to track Jubito and push him on the back foot, is only on track to one day surpass a lost legend, the Uchiha Ghost himself. You see, Kishimoto allowed for the power shifts to continually climb, but introduced two characters that were stupidly above the ever-climbing level so that he could then tie it back in later. Now, this is a writing theme he actually does a lot. He's done it previously with Itachi and Pain. Look, he creates two characters who can not just stand above the Sannin, but completely humiliate them and transcend all three Sannin at the same time, those being the strongest characters in the, actual contained progression by that point, and therefore the war arc felt way more natural when you have Itachi combating KCM1 Naruto pretty casually. So Kishimoto made both Itachi and Pain so strong that they could later be a linking bridge for when the entire power progression would change in terms of who was in it. Accordingly, Kishimoto created Madara and Hashirama in the same manner, using ambiguity to hide the truth, which he would later reveal after using Hashirama, and hence Madara's displays as the base for Jubito. Madara is then revived. However, to truly understand if Madara is fully stronger than Jubito, notice what he does. He instantly humiliates Sasuke without his eyes, and then, while paralyzed, tanks the best of what the Bijuu actually had, a force meant to rival all of shinobi kind, where he would then go on to heal wounds without weaving a single sign, and then taking on all the Bijuu, putting them on leashes, ultimately wrapping Madara around to fulfill the narrative expectation of him surpassing the same Sasuke that could track and fight Jubito, where Madara is now acting and being presented as a fusion of Madara and Hashirama, merging the two polar opposites that give rise to all things in the universe. All to then just stand over a battlefield he waylays to, only to be surprise attacked by Tobirama, who not only boasted the fastest speed of any shinobi, but also possesses an ability to transcend the concepts of space and distance themselves, and still, Madara leaves him pinned down to the ground, humiliated. Madara is representing a new ascent to godhood, out with the old, in with the new. We learn that other war monsters like Hanzo the Salamander state that even if one manages to prolong their life, abandoning one's convictions is the same as death. So for Madara, he conquered death through his conviction. Madara is now representing the rebellion of destiny itself. He didn't accept death on that very day. Madara wouldn't accept death by the only friend he's ever known, the only person he's ever trusted. Madara would hide out for the rest of his age, rotting in a cave, only to plot his revenge and wage war on the world. For Madara, he realized that he and Hashirama were unstoppable together, so he decided to become that unity. He decided to take Hashirama's power and make it his own. He decided to take Hashirama's words and justify his actions, and defy his destiny. He brought himself back from the dead, and ultimately, the Uchiha ghost, the demon the world tried to forget, was raised from the dead and dwelt among the living once again. Meaning, in truth, from a solely power scaling perspective, we may be convinced that Jibito had the stronger array of opponents, but we can't forget that Madara is narratively being built up to at least a similar level, if not possibly superior in some aspects. And while sure, he never fought the Hokage, he literally dominated all the 9 Biju and didn't let his feelings concern him any longer. He saw Jibito's failure in being defeated by both Naruto and Sasuke and killed both Naruto and Sasuke, left them for dead and bleeding out. One of the Hokages tried to stop him. He left him humiliated on the ground, with Madara also being an implied superior to that of Guru Yamato, who could stalemate Hiruzen's 5 nature styles at the same time. And just as I noted on my video on these two, we can't act like Jibito was just fighting the pinnacle of the war and Madara wasn't, because Jibito was fighting the pinnacle for that time, but the war continues to ramp up until Kaguya appears, and now Madara has implications to suggest that he is above both Tobirama and Hiruzen, who even in his old man Edo Tensei state reacts better than Tobirama against unstable Jibito, leaving just dazed Minato for the only Hokage he hasn't beaten, and that Minato is stated to be virtually equal to Tobirama. In that case, Madara then has to be inherently close to Jibito for the war progression to continuously climb, as opposed to climb, sink, climb, like that sort of thing. Even Madara's desecration of destiny and his entire narrative buildup within even his Edo Tensei state, Data Book 4, alludes to him using the wood dragon on Kurama, as if to suggest retaliation for all of his failures those years ago. Just because he had failed with Kurama and lost to the wood dragon doesn't mean Madara gives up. He defies destiny, and he gets his own wood dragon, meaning that just like in the last one, this is a bit difficult to decipher in terms of who would be the physically more imposing out of the two and who wins, and I think the best conclusion is to argue that Madara would win in this fight, as Limbo clones, hailed as imperceptible phantoms fighting on a completely different plane of reality, are a pretty hard counter to the TSOs, and the only real win condition for Jibito are very plug the controller in the butt, surround them with TSOs, that sort of thing, which leans also in Madara's favor, as Limbo again is a pretty disgusting counter, and we know that the wood style, a jutsu with equal praise to even the flying Raijin in Data Book 2, can and commonly is amplified via senjutsu, and when you account for Jibito being badly damaged by Sage Rasengans, constructs that are above Susanoo's, tanking literal complete Ninetales Biju bombs without a scratch, are going to probably be a bit imposing in terms of raw physicality. We know that Madara has a form of Susanoo beyond Sasuke and can completely humiliate him and Naruto in base, meaning that if both were to activate their avatars, Madara would dominate these same avatar-wielding fighters that pressed Jibito into defeat initially. Meaning that for Tier 2, I think the best conclusion is to hail Madara as the winner between the two, and probably the stronger, but if you're really convinced to the Jibito side, then he can be stronger and Madara be the winner. Now, in digressing to Tier 3, we have two of the most pivotal characters in the entire Uchiha clan, and not just their influence, but in how they relate to one another, being Itachi and Obito, with this fight being arguably one of, if not the largest fight in the series. And to fully frame the rivalry between these two, I want to first suggest that in terms of raw power, think Obito has a pretty clear advantage, and what I mean is Obito, even several years prior, was strong enough to physically restrain Minato when in positions of advantageous leverage, such as catching his arm or holding him in the chains, and this being the same Minato who, while physically impaled and deathly fatigued, could still pivot his feet and stop the full nine-tail strike, with later forms of Obito going on to completely tank the same Executioner's blade that's noted to be a rivaling blade to that of even Samehada, who, when wielded later, could actually slice through Edo Itachi's fireball, and in terms of pinnacle might, he's stated to be a character that Naruto, despite having pressed the quote strongest man in the Akatsuki, needs extraordinary power to defeat and needs to master the Nine Tails, which is a diction specifically used for KCM2, and Naruto, when in both KCM1 and KCM 1.5, that's only hailed as control instead of master, and Obito being a KCM2 level threat is actually pretty consistent if you could believe it. We know that despite popular belief, the Rinnegan has no real strong evidence to suggest that it made Obito far faster or far more powerful, but instead amplified the chakra that Obito is actually going to be using. For example, when Madara utilizes his Sharingan in the Zeto form, he doesn't get massively amplified, massively faster through the opening of the Rinnegan, but instead, he gains access to a different type of chakra and hence abilities. So while you probably could say that like Obito's ninjutsu, right, like the Bomb Blast Dance fire style that could match even Madara's Majestic Destroyer Flame was amplified, or even his Convoy projectiles were amplified, we know that he could completely bully KCM1 Naruto plus Kakashi and Guy to the point where the Rasengan landed on Obito is called a life-saving blow, where he later goes on to rival KCM2 Naruto and even react to his much faster chakra arms on low ends. Regardless, KCM2 is still a level that Hokage Minato is firmly at in being able to combo attack with the same War Art Kakashi that could equal White Mask Obito in Taijutsu, again showing relativity between forms, and even blitz around the full Nine Tails that is conceptually the same but simply much faster than Naruto's avatar. And I'm going to be blunt here. Itachi has no real conceivable argument to suggest that he's an equal, much less superior fighter than this Obito in terms of like raw output, KCM2 level, that sort of thing. Yeah, not gonna happen. Itachi is, however, exclusively unique in his arsenal and actually has a pretty intricate rivalry with Obito, having possibly some strong implications that he could kill him in some way if they were to fight, which could imply that similarly to the last round, Itachi may be able to kill the stronger Obito, hence why again you kind of need like two rankings when truly settling a ranking debate like this. So where does this rivalry come from? Well, nearly a decade ago, a young Itachi would realize the depth of the shinobi world, and that if he ever wants to bring peace, so that he never has to witness a battleground like the Third Great Ninja War ever again, he needs to be the strongest. He commonly thinks back to a man who once attacked the daimyo and his guard squad, which Itachi was a part of, where this masked man would completely destroy everyone around him using a basic genjutsu, leaving just Itachi and his teammate Tenma, who was going to get brutally murdered in a matter of moments. Itachi, seeing the man slip through Tenma, mangling his child friend, was so distraught at the man's aura and couldn't even move, trying to process the phenomenon of the man's body. Much later, he would realize that very man would be slipping in and out of the Uchiha hideout, using probably the same jutsu to weave around the cameras until Itachi finally caught him. They exchange brief words, and Itachi finally pauses that he will help him get revenge on the Uchiha clan, and in exchange, he doesn't lay a finger on Sasuke or the village. And if he refuses, Itachi says it's not a matter of if, he will kill Obito, which Obito somewhat concedes to much later in saying that if Itachi knew everything about him, he'd be dead, even calling Itachi their eyesore for why the village is off limits. Databook 3 even actually implies that Itachi's death and the Tsukiyomi are of the same importance, or the same importance within Obito's mind. Similarly, within the Naruto Road to Ninja movie, which is displayed as something further intertwined within the manga material, as in July 2012, Shonen Jump issue 34 was released, featuring multiple Road to Ninja character designs by Kishimoto, including Naruto, Minato, and Sasuke, as well as only a single day after the release of Volume 61, there was a secret volume guidebook for Road to Ninja, which had supplementary handwritten, guide stuff by Kishimoto with the same authorship style to all 4 databooks, with Q&As and stuff like that inside of it. Itachi would then force Obito to retreat and concede that if Itachi put his mind to it, he could kill Obito. However, why would Obito genuinely concede of this fact? Why would he actually think that Itachi may be able to kill him? Well, it's kind of complicated. So think about it like this, right? If you take their auras to be power correlated, such as Itachi previously being suppressed, but once he was stronger, he could shut down Obito's aura, with auras being used as power indicators by Tobirama, Hiruzen, Orochimaru, Fugaku, etc., then Itachi was probably rivaling in Obito during the massacre, hence to why they also acknowledge each other as opponents. So let me frame it like this, right? Itachi in the massacre could be like 30%, let's say, of Obito's power, give or take, right? This would then be something Obito would know. However, there's a big factor of how much stronger Itachi got from the massacre through the power of his MS. You see, the Uchiha clan are a clan that feels love deeper than any other. However, when that love is taken or runs dry, an equally powerful hatred emerges, furthering the strong emotion and psychological shock that manifests itself in the ocular nerves, known as the Sharingan. And the deeper the darkness gets, the greater the ocular powers become until they can no longer be stopped. You see, Sasuke, through his MS and realizing how much Itachi went through, was able to continually deepen his darkness and thus evolve his Susanoo from a ribcage to a perfect Susanoo, from a rib cage to a complete Susanoo through 4 major amps, with just one of those being one that made him unrecognizably more powerful through the hatred he has for Danzo and what he put Itachi through. Sasuke's darkness is merely the shadow of Itachi's pain and suffering, so it's pretty safe to suggest that Itachi should get more than an unrecognizable change in power from that hypothetical 30%. Meaning he's now a 60 or 70% of Obito's power, and even possibly more, depending on how relative you think that initial Itachi was. And of course, these numbers aren't really definitive, just means of showing you guys why Obito might concede that, Itachi could probably kill him, because there's a heavy ambiguity factor there. Itachi probably got strong enough to kill him. I mean, look, he got 2 mythical spirit weapons that are ethereal and are basically so strong that they make him possess the greatest ocular ability according to Databook 3, plus more honing of the stated strongest genjutsu and the stated strongest physical attack. So believe me, Itachi could kill Obito, and I'm not saying he would, but if I had to put it to this Itachi, who we are taking at the pinnacle of his life, I think he'd actually kill Obito like 5.5 out of 10 times, despite Obito being the stronger fighter. Now, to address what some are probably viewing as the elephant in the room of, well, how would he actually do that? What about Kamui? I think here's a pretty good way to look at it, okay? Well, Kamui is seemingly a perfect technique. It has been countered in nearly every single fight it's ever been in, and each time the other characters were able to find something in their arsenal to completely null it. Minato used the Flying Raijin, Fu and Torne used Nano Beetles, Konan used Paper Bombs, Pain had plans to counter it with Rain. So look, to posit that Itachi can't do it is pretty dumb, to say the least, considering his arsenal is far wider and more adept than really anybody I mentioned. Susanoo, ethereal weapons, strongest physical attack, strongest genjutsu. I mean, bro, you kind of get what I mean. He should be able to counter Kamui, even if we aren't fully sure on how he would do that. Following the 2 clan killers, we have Tier 4, which consists of Summit Sasuke, Shisui, and Fugaku, and this one's actually the most straightforward when you present all the evidence. Many shinobi, regardless of time period or location, utilize body flicker, but Shisui is particularly skilled at this art, even when faced against the backdrop of Kage themselves, so much in fact that Yashiro Uchiha, a 45-year-old shinobi who fought not just the second war but the third as well, remarks that Shisui was one of the most talented clan members ever, and was renowned particularly as one of the greatest body flicker users ever, hence to the name, Shisui the Teleporter, which is one to become feared by the ninja of other lands. Shisui, however, despite not actively participating in the Third War due to his age, gained a notoriety so profound that even Kumo Gakude's perfect Jinchuriki 8 Tails Killer B recognized Shisui as the strongest Uchiha, out of all Uchiha capable of utilizing Genjutsu. His power is such that Kirigakure's elite Mizukage guard squad Ao still clearly recognizes Shisui's ability over 10 years after their wartime encounter, remarking notable fear for Shisui in his quote top-notch Genjutsu, the Kodo Matsukami, which gained him an equal renown to his body flicker according to the birthday columns, pressing fear into not just the enemy nations but the village higher-ups as well, ultimately allowing for not just a level of fear to develop, but also what would only be described as Shisui being viewed as a rising star, capable of fulfilling the gap in military loss left by Minato, the 4th Hokage, and all 3 Sannin." End quote. Both Chapter 223 and the 3rd anime profile guides remark that the Fireball Jutsu is one that defines an Uchiha shinobi's capacity, ultimately determining whether or not you're even worthy of the crest, meant to symbolize the one who manipulates fire. What makes this so keynote is that Itachi, after gloating about the size of his own fireball, states that Shisui and his father, Fugaku, the clan leader and runner-up for 4th Hokage, could possibly replicate one of that size, implying this would be the top 3 Uchiha for that era, placing them at the peak of Konoha as well, due to the Uchiha being hailed as the strongest clan. But this should remain consistent with what we said prior concerning Fugaku being considered as a candidate for Hokage, a title that requires one to stand at not just the peak of Konoha, but the other nations as well, including the Gokage. But Fugaku being above Shisui probably just isn't true, or at least not in the way you'd ever think, which I brought up before, seeing as Fugaku's only MS implication is highlighted to be some sort of Genjutsu, as it can bypass Itachi's Sharingan and show a Genjutsu demonstration of how he would Genjutsu control the Nine Tails in the anime. Shisui's MS is much more focused on Genjutsu, with it being called the strongest Genjutsu ever by characters like a much older Tsukiyomi-wielding Itachi, a Genjutsu that's a far cry beyond Kage Summit Sasuke's, who never even surpasses Itachi until gaining the EMS. Fugaku is obviously inferior to Itachi in kunai throwing, as implied by Kid Sasuke, and Itachi concedes that Shisui is outright superior to him at shuriken throwing by quite a bit. Therefore, the conclusion would just be that Shisui has superior speed according to his body flicker speeds, better basic shinobi skills, better genjutsu, and has extremely relative high-level fire style, if not possibly more, that's even stronger than Itachi's, one that can't be compared to ordinary fire style. Fitting with how Shisui is so great, it actually takes multiple water style users to cancel it out in the anime, giving us the ultimate conclusion that Danzo himself comes to, in that both Shisui and Itachi are stronger than any person in the clan, despite the knowledge of Shisui's Mangekyo being omitted from the statement, when there is in fact knowledge of Fugaku's in the Konoha intelligence files as shown in the Boruto anime. Meaning that for this tier, in both power and a fight at large, Shisui is certainly above Fugaku, the leader of the clan and 4th Hokage candidate. However, what about Sasuke? Could Shisui really scale to the same Kage Summit Sasuke, capable of fighting all the 5 Kage consecutively? Well, yes. Shisui Uchiha is a fighter who, albeit doesn't stand toe-to-toe with a peak Itachi, but is still in a tier just below that, being pretty similar to Itachi in how they actually relate to this Sasuke. And the reason why I say this is in the most canon interpretation of the Danzo encounter, being the novel, which is actually listed on a manga canon timeline, Shisui gets paralytically poisoned by bugs smaller than mosquitoes but with the bites of scorpions, by virtue of one of the best, Suguru Aburame. And even despite him being literally paralyzed, once Danzo rips one eye out, the adrenaline or sheer shock was enough for Shisui to body flicker away so fast that Danzo couldn't even perceive him with his left eye, which is actually key due to, while yes, the body flicker is essentially a stated untraceable speed, the right-hand tiger that Shisui notoriously couples it with is not. And that would have had to basically perception blitz Danzo, who, by this point had already recuperated himself from his inner joy and resolve to steal the eye. And in a video of my buddy Sage, I went over how Danzo's left eye's perception changing from this point to the Kage Summit is probably just not true, seeing as Danzo over the years has gained over a dozen Sharingan to constantly drain his reserves, which was detrimental to Kakashi with just one. Therefore, Danzo's left eye's perception when Shisui blitzes him would actually be equal to or possibly greater than his left eye's perception that was able to track a peak Kage Summit Sasuke and all of his higher forms like the humanoid Susanoo and whatnot, with Danzo's raw combat speed being able to react to Sasuke's Amaterasu with his, limbs and stuff that can actually completely equal out Sasuke's raw combat speed, with some instances like the chapter synopsis statement claiming they pierce each other at the same time. Therefore, ultimately, Danzo's perception would be a blitz level above or quite a tier above this speed, with Shisui being quite a blitz level above that perception. So, Shisui is logically much, much faster than Kage Summit Sasuke could ever probably dream of, despite not actually having the MS active, which actually does amplify your chakra and the potency at which you could exert yourself, theoretically, although I don't think it's a very large amp. Sasuke, though, during the Chunin exams, utilized his Sharingan to better harness other jutsus like fireballs and whatnot, so, Shisui could theoretically amplify his other jutsu like his wind and lightning release to, fight Sasuke and whatever. Now, this level would obviously force Shisui to be beyond Danzo, who at the end of his life finally concedes that Hiruzen, the man who beat him for the title of third Hokage according to the Sakura novel, has always stood one step ahead in terms of not only power but leadership ability, which is something consistent for Shisui's narrative throughout the novels, where the Uchiha clan actually are fully confident in Shisui having the ability to break into Hiruzen's manor and kidnap him, which was so key that when Shisui died, the entire coup d'etat was delayed. So you're looking at someone who should be just far beyond Kage Summit Sasuke in terms of not just physical ability, but even the respective MS abilities, but, just in a fight overall. I mean, that for the ranking of this tier, I think it doesn't really change between raw power and fight rankings, because Fugaku has no counter to the Susanoo, which Shisui also has, as we know that the manga left it kind of ambiguous, and Kishimoto worked on a design for the Storm games, and he also drew the Susanoo lance as his preferred weapon over the sword and the official Naruto Top 99 artwork. And thus, the ranking for Tier 4 would be Shisui, then Sasuke, then Fugaku. Now, for those who were curious about Izuna or Kagami, this is probably where they would be, and being just right around or behind Fugaku. And I'm not, however, going to simply speculate on the hypotheticals of how strong they could have been, or here's what they possibly could have done, or whatever, because, to be blunt, we know really nothing, except one was a rival to Tobirama, with fire style that could equal Tobirama's legendary water style in the anime, which is actually the medium that it's most impressive in, by the way, and was a Kenjutsu master. So I would personally put him here, and then Kagami in last, because all we know is that he just had like a powerful chakra, and was strong enough to be out on Tobirama's elite escort squad, and that's really it. So if you were curious, this is probably where I'd rank them in both power and a fight. Okay, now look, you're asking bonus? Yes, and it's not really a bonus, it's just perhaps another thing you might want to include, and this is because this wouldn't be a proper Uchiha ranking if I just concluded here, as there's one Uchiha that I think deserves to be put in tier 1, if you could believe it, and that's Sarada Uchiha, the half-blood daughter of Sasuke, who's currently in the manga at the time of this video, being very impressive, being capable of actually beating the Ryu Shinju, who is completely confident, who is quite confidently above the same no limiters code stated to surpass Jigen, with Jura implying that Ryo could actually just kill him next time if he wants, and we saw that when fighting Jigen, Sasuke was struggling to react at all, relying ultimately upon Naruto's Baryon mode to save them. Now, really, after the first 20 chapters of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, Sarato's power truly transcends what it ever once was, which was previously a level that could actually fight Boro, a high-ranking Akara member, said to be close to the power of Notsutsuki, where now, after realizing the reality has been rewritten without anyone listening to her pleas, she gains the Mangekyo Sharingan, which has at least the ability for her to output at a bare minimum of 4 gravity transcending forces that act pretty similarly to a black hole, if you could believe it, where she then actually amps up the gravitational forces, pulling the Ryu Shinju in and actually compressing it so hard that he literally explodes. And to compress a being like this and cause them to explode, it can physically occur through a few different things, namely being like a stellar collapse, nuclear fusion, or rapid decompression as seen in black holes, which could very well concretize Orihime being a black hole, or possibly even the strongest attack if you think it's supposed to be like a narrative rival to what the Amaterasu was. Now, consequently, this would mean that she would certainly be outright stronger than Sasuke, with almost no chance for Sasuke and by virtue Indra to ever kill her. With Jigen already being a fighter that can completely dance around Sasuke's perfect Susanoo and literally kick him out of it, with someone physically more imposing than that, plus an ability to practically warp time and space into a black hole, Sarda should absolutely slam Sasuke. Now, of course, the reason I didn't mention her is that, some dudes would prefer the manga to conclude before cementing her ranking, or simply don't like her, or want to stick to just completed manga information. But if you want the honest truth, then she is the strongest Uchiha to have ever lived by that point. But what did you guys think? Did you enjoy this ranking? There perhaps isn't quite the deep and constant nuance of the Akatsuki rankings where every single member could probably be swapped around, which I also did, and you should go watch that ranking. But when there are nuances such as Madara and Jibito or Itachi and Obito, they're actually very interesting. So yeah, if you enjoy and learn something, let me know in the comments below. Hype this video up, subscribe, all that good stuff. Although, more importantly, may God bless you all. Love you guys.